would assert that you only need to convince the central bankers, and then it will propagate from there. If you could convince the central bankers that we are beyond the realm of where we can grow our economy forever, then it would percolate out, because that consumption that you're talking about, I don't know that people say, oh my gosh, we're going into a recession, I have to go down to Walmart and buy stuff. What happens is the Federal Reserve pumps money into the they call it quantitative easing, or whatever name they give for it, and they try to jumpstart the economy again. Now with COVID, what was done when consumption stopped? Well, in European countries, some countries gave a fixed level of income. Of course, that sounded too socialistic to even think about in the United States, but they actually wanted their citizens to be able to continue to buy food. But some countries started pushing out the COVID stimulus, like let's get people buying again. Of course, people can't go out and shop if they're in lockdown. So, but again, the banks hold the key, because the banks are the bulwarks around this meme of economic growth at all cost, willing to throw all of future life under the bus. We have to preserve economic growth.
But nobody really, very few people really want to throw humanity under the bus to preserve economic growth. The challenge for us as human beings is to understand, from my perspective, that it's not evil people or misinformed people that are the problem right now. We don't have to persuade the big oil companies. We don't have to persuade the bankers. We don't have to persuade anybody of much of anything. Enough of us already know. We need to recognize that they are dependent on us, and we can make the changes that change the system. They are as stuck in the system as we are. They may be making more money out of it, and no doubt about that in a lot of cases, but they're stuck. They go to work, they do their job. If they don't do it, if they do what you're advising them to do, they lose their jobs, they get replaced by somebody else who's willing to, and we get a bunch of, not particularly courageous leaders in our big institutions running them and us until we've gone too far. Now the transition is tough. It's not like we can just shut down the consumer economy all of a sudden and not suffer pain. We will suffer enormous pain if we just do this cavalierly, but we'll have to do it cavalierly if we wait too long. Mm-hmm. We have the chance, though, to evolve out of this. It's hard, but it's the surest path to success.
Well,
how do we do that, Bill, besides voting with our dollars?
Voting with our dollars and voting in the ballot box are the surest ways to do that, in my view. We can make very rapid progress. We have at our disposal now a set of technologies that can enable us to live rich lives interacting with each other on a tiny fraction of the resources that we're currently using. COVID has actually taught us some of the ways that we can do that by, forcing us to stay in our homes where we're doing things like this instead of flying somewhere to have this discussion. We have everything that we need to live good lives on a fraction of what we're doing right now. But we need to take the steps. Right now, we're subsidizing the old way of life because we're afraid that if we don't, we're all going to collapse. So we have to have the courage to allow the economy to follow the more natural path to an economy where we can all create. We need to support artistry and crafts, crafts work. We have to support beauty and connection and all of those things that we don't.
Music, non-polluting industries, yes.
Those things that make us know that we're alive. Right now, we're just discounting all that. We have an industry to provide us with music. We have 12 musicians who provide us with all the top hits that we want. Every one of us is a musician every one of us is an artist, every one of us is a creator, but we've centralized that and shut down. And all those people out there, so many of those people that are homeless, that are addicted to drugs, that are tired of the system, they are people that contain within them some of that magic that they can't express, because we have this overgrown, centralized system that makes them feel like they are worthless. And we'll let them work at McDonald's, but we won't reward them for the magic that they have inside them. The only way to let that happen is to allow this big industrialized, corporatist, statist, it's the worst dream of both the left and the right. This centralized system that takes power away from people. And we don't want to give it to people through this so-called socialist, thing, because socialism is just capitalism by a monopoly. If it's this industrial model, we need to actually trust that people are creators individually and give people choices.
Well, I love what you're saying, and there are many people who do not have the economic welfare to be creative, who do not have enough. And if we're talking only about America, by the way, this is one thing, but if we're talking about the entire world, we have huge amounts of people whose climate is about to tank and who are going to be refugees. And we're going to have thousands of people moving away from very dangerous situations into Europe and America and Canada. And we're going to have to think about those people too. It's not a matter of just creativity. It's a matter of survival for the majority of the people on the earth.
I wanted to respond to one thing that, Bill, when you were coming back to my proposal that if you changed the central banks, the whole system would change. And you came up with something that was, I think, fear-based and incorrect. And I know that both of you gentlemen are into non-fear-based solutions. That is, work the fear out, because capitalizing, no pun intended, capitalizing, or maybe pun intended, capitalizing on people's fears is not the way to go. There's an economist who I'll say I worship him. I revere him highly. Herman Daly, D-A-L-Y.
Yes,
and
I know him.
He was a senior economist for the World Bank for 6 years until he realized that they just didn't get it and were not going to get it. But he has only once, he said, has he offered policy recommendations. And those were what I call Herman Daly's 10 candles. And I actually have one of our YouTube videos called Herman Daly's 10 candles. But the candle of those 10, which I regard as the most informative, is that we could change. We could go from exponential growth, 2% per year is exponential growth. 2% per year is a doubling of 37 years. I taught mathematics and statistics. Like 3% a year, the doubling becomes more like 25 years. Okay, if we went from a 10% fractional reserve requirement, which means that the banks only have to keep 10% of the supposed money they have, and then they can lend out 90% more. So if you only have a 10% reserve requirement, then you can put aside a small amount of money and lend out a huge amount of money, and that percolates through the system. If we went from the 10% reserve requirement to 20% to 30%, our growth economic mean would coast to a level playing field where banking was no longer the most lucrative business on earth. Banking and perhaps oil, but oil is going to self-destruct at some point anyhow. But I think we could save ourselves if we could convince central bankers to bite the bullet and go for a moderated growth strategy. But I'll send you a link to the 10 Candles paper.
Yeah, please do. So how does the public deal with this concept? How do they do something to influence a central bank?
Well, the public deals with commercial banks, but the commercial banks are affected by the central bank. So I don't know that we would have the public picketing outside the Federal Reserve, although that might be an option. I mean, civil disobedience or just demonstrations, if it's informed public, they will attract attention, and attention to concepts that are new, because again, we have accepted for so long that growth is our
Religion.
Unknown.
Religion, it's a necessity.
well, I'm trying to think of it's our manifest destiny. It's our destiny. You know, growth is when Europeans colonized North America, it was a doctrine of manifest destiny. We were destined to expand out to the coast, pushing out the people that lived there. That they were not landowners; they didn't have titles. We've come to believe that growth economics, which was only really installed as the only game in town about 100 years ago, when J.P. Morgan endowed the chairmanship of the business school, the economics department of the business school of the University of Chicago, world's preeminent business school. And he had installed a growth economist. No accident that Milton Friedman came out of University of Chicago Business School. And Milton Friedman's notion of growth economics became imprinted in Reaganite and Thatcherite, Thatcherism, their economic policies. And we've all come to accept that we've got to grow. We've got every company, we've got to grow, we've got to grow. If we changed that expectation, if people started questioning the very idea that it's possible or beneficial for us to grow the physical size of our economy from year to year, if we could get people to wake up to that realization, that would be a major coup.
I agree. And I think that millions of people really do understand that. And we're confusing our terms, because there was a time when we really did need to physically grow. We needed to grow our productive capacity so we had enough stuff for people to live good lives. Yeah. Now we have mastered production. We're producing a lot of stuff that we don't need, and we're not producing some things that people do need, but we know how to produce. We have mastered that. What we don't recognize perhaps is that growth can be physical or growth can be developmental. A strange thing happened to me when I turned about 18. My entire life I'd been growing. I started out really small, and then I got bigger and bigger. And then when I turned 18, believe it or not, I just stopped growing physically, except out, a little bit more. And I hear that it happens to everybody, but we keep growing inside. We keep becoming more complex, and we get to realize more. Our economy is like an 18-year-old child that we genetically engineered to keep on growing physically, so that he didn't have to actually develop his internal. And now we have this giant body that just consumes the planet, and it's all out of fear.
When I was pushing hard on that same meme that you're talking about, that growth does not have to be in scale. Growth can be in complexity. Okay.
Yes.
I used to have a set of slides that I would show, first with a triangle, and then with the triangle coming out of each of the three sides. And so you'd get a 6-pointed star.
Yeah.
And then a triangle coming out of each of those sides. And you'd end up getting what's called a Sierpinski triangle, where the edge is infinite. The edge becomes infinite, but the volume it contains is finite.
Yes, it's beautiful.
I'll have to dig out those set of slides and share them.
Yeah. Here's the other book that your folks can read, and it's also kind of left and right, because it's What We Learned in the Rainforest: Business Lessons from Nature. And what we realize when we look at the rainforest is that this is a beautiful display of what the human economy and culture can behave like. Natural systems go through a process where they grow physically for a period of time until they're grown up, and then they grow internally with increasing complexity and diversity. And here's the magical thing that happens in nature, that you begin with uniform, highly competitive organisms, right? You got the grasses out there, they're competing with everything else and they dominate. And then you begin to have diversity come in. So feedback and adaptation happens, right? Feedback comes when you reach a limit, you adapt, you change, and then as you're adapting, diversity happens because this adapts differently from this and from this and this. So there's a diversification of the system that happens. And then with diversification comes complexity. And with complexity, you have new combinations. And when you have new combinations, you have the birth of something new. And that is the process by which the rainforest created the evolutionary process that led to the emergence of every advanced form of life on the planet, including ours. We didn't come from a system that just grew physically, you know, until it reached the moon. We came from a system that grew for a while physically, but then increased its complexity and became more and more aware of itself and engaged. And that's where we are right now. We got a long way to go if we'll just let that system, you know, persist. But if we don't, we're just going to collapse. We are way out on a limb, as you say.